you can't do anything for God to love you more than he does right this second.
Yeah.
And that was like a weight being taken off, or a slap across the face going, get with it. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about him. It's about grace. It's about how God can take any circumstance, I don't care what it is, and turn it to his glory.
Today is going to be a great conversation because Kathy Jones is here.
Hi there.
Kathy is the other half of Patrick and Kathy Jones. Mm-hmm. And Patrick and Kathy moved here a little over a year ago, and took a position at Emmanuel Lutheran Church, which I just got through saying is an iconic church in town.
And I said,
lots
really?
happened over the years. And so I think you're in a really good spot, a really good place for you guys to do ministry in maybe even a different way than you've seen it before. So because I think that there's some people there who are willing to go where you want to go. And so I'm excited about you being here. I'm excited about you being at that leading that congregation. What I want to talk a little bit about today is how you got here, how you got to Longview, because that's kind of a circuitous journey. And the other thing is I haven't sat down and talked to a pastor's wife about what it's like to be a pastor's wife, how it's worked for you, and some of the challenges of walking with somebody who's over their heads involved in a church family and also trying to have a family of their own. So we want to talk about that a little bit. But first of all, Kathy, let's start with a little bit about you and where you came from, how you got to Longview. Wow. And you can take as much time as you want.
So like Patrick, I'm from Minnesota originally. Only I was from the big cities, the Twin Cities. I was from Minneapolis, and he was from Duluth. Didn't know each other back then. And God has been good my whole life. I've always known he was there. I didn't really know what that meant. But I remember being a little girl and having this cross that was crocheted for me by my grandma. And I knew if I put all my dolls underneath the covers and pulled the covers up, the boogeyman couldn't get me if I had that cross. So I have no clue where I got that from, but I just knew that.
Well, you were in Lutheran land. So.
Yeah, I was, but I was Presbyterian. Actually, my great-grandpa was a Methodist minister, Swedish Methodist minister, not to be confused with any other kind, apparently. And the really cool thing is that, and I was talking to you about this a little bit, is that my background was interesting growing up, but there was quite a bit of abuse in the family from my father, and who I think really struggled with, possibly literally, but for sure metaphorically, a lot of demons himself. And despite all that, one day I was a cheerleader. We had just won the state basketball tournament. And my mother called at my boyfriend's, I was like 15, at my boyfriend's house and said, your dad's really not feeling good. Could you come home? I said, well, you just keep me posted on how he's doing, okay?
Yeah.
And so she called again. That's before cell phones. So she had to call their home phone because his parents were there and stuff. And it turns out my dad had a polyp that opened up in his colon, and he had peritonitis poisoning and almost died.
Oh, wow.
And when he got out of the hospital, he found God. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'd gone to church because Grandma from second grade on brought me to church. I sang in the choir. I was real involved in, they kind of had a youth group, but I was more involved in choir. And he kept pushing Jesus. He'd play Evie. Do you remember Evie?
Oh, yeah.
He'd play their tapes back when there were cassette tapes, and he'd leave Billy Graham flyers around the house. And, of course, being Dad, he took us to the Jesus People Church downtown. This is the 70s.
Yeah.
This was like 74, 75, 76, somewhere in there. So because at some point my junior or senior year, without telling my dad, I said the prayer in the back of one of those books. Didn't really understand it, but I said, okay, got that done. And when I went to go to the University of Minnesota when I graduated high school, my dad got a hold of a friend he knew was in Campus Crusade, and she invited me to Campus Crusade. And I pictured this circle of nerds sitting on the floor with their horn-rimmed glasses reading the Bible. And but I couldn't say no to a friend. This was older friend of mine. And so I went. And it was the coolest thing that ever happened to me. Couldn't tell you what happened, but I can tell you this. A light bulb went off in my head when I heard the Bible verse, 2 Corinthians, I think. You should no longer live for yourself, but live for him who died for us and rose again. I was like, excuse me? Wait, not live for me?
Yeah.
You sure about that? Are you sure? Anyways, so fast forward, I ended up wanting what I wanted when I wanted it, and got married to somebody that I had several pastors say I shouldn't marry. Good guy, just he was an atheist.
Yeah.
We didn't have the same values, so we ended up getting divorced like 4 years later. You live and learn. And he wanted the divorce. I didn't. And so that was a struggle, but God is always good. A few years later, I got involved. I met a woman I was working with who got me involved in an Assemblies of God church, Bethel in Campbell, California. And so that brought me back to God and really grew my faith. And during that time...
What did you grab hold of in those early times as far as your spiritual experience? What were you grabbing hold of? The Bible, relationship, prayer? What kind of got you?
In the early days, it was probably the relationship with God, the friendships I had. I mean, I have most of the late 70s and early 80s, I don't know any non-Christian music. I was really involved in that Campus Crusade scene, and that was my life. That was my church. And then when I went to graduate, I moved to a Baptist church they changed it from Edina Baptist to, a church of something, but it was a Baptist church, but they found that they weren't getting as many people when the word Baptist in it, so they changed that. But I was there for a number of years, and I was grabbing hold of the fact that God can do anything. Grabbing hold of the fact that God loved me, and I struggled with that, and I was in some therapy, just due to some things with my father, but I was seeing a pastor who was also a therapist. I say this for one reason, because he asked me one day, he goes, what do you have to do for God to love you? Oh, and I had the list. Oh, yeah. So, I think if I have more Bible studies and run more Bible studies and share my faith more, and I had a whole list. And he said, and this is a pastor, so forgive me, anybody, bullshit. And I was like, excuse you? And he goes, you can't do anything for God to love you more than he does right this second.
Yeah.
And that was like a weight being taken off, or a slap across the face going, get with it. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about him. It's about grace. It's about how God can take any circumstance, I don't care what it is, and turn it to his glory. And so I go on with life, and I was working at a company. I was a paralegal. Then I moved into corporate, I was managing the immigration program at a storage company called Network Appliance. I've been at a couple of them, so I always had to stop and think which one it was.
Yeah.
And Patrick happened to come down maybe a year after I'd been there, and he had two people who needed green cards, and we just got to talking. And he'll tell this story, and we were just friends, and we'd email occasionally, but it was nothing more than that. Went to lunch to talk about the fact he has a son with autism. Yeah. And just learning more about that. But he came up to visit me at my cube, apparently, to pick me up to go to lunch one day. And I had a bunch of Bible verses because I was trying to memorize them. I had them on my cube and encouraging things. And he said, oh, crap. I should run now. But he didn't. And
he was significantly attracted to you.
Apparently. That's probably true. But so I remember during the time that we dated or were trying to decide whether to date, but we were friends and stuff. He'd come over to pick me up to go out to dinner or something, and I'd have a Bible laying there, and he'll say, he'd pretend he never looked at it, but when I was upstairs getting ready, he would look through the Bible. But he'd have these questions I couldn't answer. And so I would be like, he'd ask a question, and I'd go, yeah. Inside I'm going, God, you got to help me here. I can't answer this question. I've never thought about it before. Because he's an engineer by trade and by originally.
Yeah.
And
definitely thinks like an engineer.
and definitely thinks like an engineer. And at some point, he was driving home, and at some point he was going to go home, and he couldn't turn the car into the driveway, and kept going to the bookstore. And he got Case for Christ and the Bible.
Yeah.
And he read the Case for Christ first. And he said, I'm not going to read another outside book about the Bible until I've actually read it, the whole Bible. And he became a believer. And he wrote his parents, his whole family, a letter about it. And it was like crickets. He didn't hear a word back. Mm-hmm. But he has grown. I've been a believer since high school. And he's like a race car driver, because he did race cars. On that project,
he knows how to go fast.
He loves to spend time with God. He loves to read his scriptures. He loves. So once we were married, we started attending a Presbyterian, very evangelical Presbyterian church, Community Presbyterian Church in Danville, California, and awesome place. And he was in a Bible study, a men's Bible study at 6 a.m. in the morning, and on a Saturday morning. And one of the gentlemen said that always was able to answer questions. It was an older man. When the senior pastor didn't have an answer, he talked to him afterwards and said, how come you know so much about the Bible and about God? And he said, because I went to seminary for the second half of my life. And that, I think within the next couple of weeks, he'd signed up for Fuller.
Yeah.
And 8 or 9 years later, I forget now, because he was working 50 hours a week, he finished seminary. And his intent was originally to work with groups of men.
Yeah.
Because his mentor, Daryl, incredible man who really led him in faith, that's what he did. He would spend all his time meeting with men in the community. And just the impact he had on Patrick was incredible.
Right.
And I'm so thankful for that. But so then one day we like to go in our RV places, but we went to Idaho. I don't think I'd ever really heard of Idaho, except my cousins lived there. And I thought, okay, I'll go visit. So we went to visit for a week. And I happened to make just a little comment. This isn't so bad. And so couple that with the fact the last day we were in Idaho with my Mormon cousins, he was getting ready for bed, laid down, and he had an encounter with God. God said 3 things: move here, education, and talk about my son. And he was I was sleeping, he was in tears, and he went down and talked to my cousin about it. Just a little bit over a year later, we had moved into a house in Idaho. And he still wasn't a pastor. We didn't know why we were there, except that God told us we had to be there. And it took a good year of us getting confirmation about that, me really challenging him. And actually, before we moved, I was in San Diego, overlooking the ocean at a corporate function that I had planned to organized. And he called, and I'm like, why are we moving to Idaho? Look at the beach. I mean,
Yeah.
And I was feeling a little like, because he had this revelation from God, I have to go do this. And I was on board, but I was still a little like, I'm feeling forced. I don't like to feel forced. And he said something to me. He said, you know what, Kathy? We've been in this together since we got married. And when God tells you to come and encourages you to come to Idaho, to go to Idaho, we'll go. But until then, don't worry about it. And right there, I said, okay, we'll go. I just needed
Do you
him
know
to say
how
that.
many pastors and their wives have had this conversation.
Really?
Do you know how many women have said yes to an encounter that their husbands had with God that they didn't necessarily have with God?
Right.
But that took them on it's a real common thing. I mean, same thing happened with my wife and I. It's interesting being on this side of it.
Yeah.
But it's more interesting hearing your side. And of course, Jody's told me her side of it many times.
Right.
Like he said, what?
Yeah, that's kind of how I was.
Yeah.
And I was majorly questioning. I believe God can do these things. I believe all of that. But I need confirmation because I didn't get that message. Okay. I did get one message from God, but that was not related to this trip, but it's still related to life. I was trying to decide whether to go back to work. I had taken a couple years off to take care of the kids because Patrick was married before and he had 2 kids, and all 3 of the adults worked about an hour and a half away from home. So one of us, as they went in middle school, high school, had to be around.
Yeah.
And I was an elder at this Presbyterian church, and one of my oversights was the youth ministry, and I was down there with them worshiping, praying, oh God, what should I do for a career? Should I go back? Should I not? And I know it wasn't me because I heard this very clear. I don't care what you do. I care who you are.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? Why is that so hard for me to understand?
Yeah.
And so that's been a journey for me to understand. And I think part of Patrick and I walking through this journey is me also learning, what does it mean when God says, I don't care what you do, I care who you are. Who we are is what we take with us.
Yeah.
Not what we do.
That's great that you had that as an anchor point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we were in Idaho. We started checking out different churches, and just to go to, we started out a little tiny church, Journey Church. And the pastor there loved to preach about all the things women weren't allowed to do. And then he'd come up to me afterwards and go, what'd you think of that? And I'm like, do you really want? So we'd have open discussions, and I'd tell him why I disagreed with him.
Yeah.
I have this theory or the way I look at it, I'm a child of God who happens to be a female, not a female who happens to be a child of God.
Yeah.
God looks at who I am as a person first.
Yeah.
And
his person.
And his person, his child.
Yeah.
Male or female, I'm still his child because there is no male or female in heaven. So I understand hierarchy. I get all that. I'm not going to have the debates about that right now because it works for Patrick and I. And fortunately, he's so much smarter than me. So we started there for a little while, and then we heard about, my cousins kept telling me about this Lutheran church.
Yeah.
These are Mormons telling us about a Lutheran church. And it was one of the few churches there that didn't have, when you walked in, all this material about how to preach to Mormons, etc. And so we tried it out, and we just started going. And it was also one of the few churches where women could actually pick up the collection or give a testimony, or, that was important to me. And so Patrick was asked, Patrick decided to lead a men's Bible study. And the pastor would come occasionally. And then he was asked to fill in at the pulpit, because he's done it before when we were in California, at this little church in American Falls, Shepherd of the Falls, the most wonderful people in the world. So he did that a few times, and then he got a phone call and said, we wanted to see if you'd consider being our pastor. And we're like, excuse you? Pastor?
Why would I want to ruin a perfectly good relationship with God and the church?
Yeah, and our pastor in California had said, go to Idaho, but the world needs people that are Christian. The church doesn't. We need people out there letting people know, because once you're in the church, sometimes it's hard to reach people that are out there. And so through much prayer and then some schooling, again, because he already had a master's in theology, but he didn't have an MDiv, and he wasn't Lutheran. And details. So he went to a Lutheran seminary for a few Lutheran classes that would finish up and round out what he needed. And but in the meantime, he was still down there preaching. And Patrick and I have a hard time leaving things the way they are. We want to help make things better.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an older congregation that we adore. But anytime we try something new or want to, it's like they didn't have the energy to want to do it.
Right.
And I don't know that our DNA coming out of a place like Silicon Valley is such that we can just go, okay, this is okay. We'll just stay right here. I think it would be much more missional, much more let's reach out to people, maybe not in the Campus Crusade way, which I don't think I could ever do again. Here's this 4 spiritual laws. I would want to build relationships and talk about what God's doing in my life because I want somebody to want what I have.
Yeah.
Not just be hit over the head and out of fear find God. I want them to fall in love with him. So we stayed there about a year, a little over a year, and his contract was up. We found him a good Baptist pastor to fill the pulpit who's still there. Awesome. Todd Wood is the most awesome guy. And we went to the church that we had started in Idaho Falls, and he became pastor there. He was at first just filling in because the pastor got sick, and then the associate pastor left, and the music director left, all before Patrick really got on board. He was doing an internship there, and he ended up pastor. And a lot of lessons from that. It was those 2 experiences were my first times getting to your question with the thought of being a pastor's wife. Yeah. And I'd always gone into churches, and I'm the kind of person who just gets involved in 5,000 things because I like it. It helps my faith to be involved and not just, sit there on church on Sunday
Show up for services, yeah.
Right. And I found that as a pastor's wife, there's limitations. Mm-hmm. And at first I was a little resentful of it. And
what kind of limitation? What are you talking about?
So you come in and it's basically, so you're going to help us with children's ministry. Oh heck no. No, that's not my gift. That's not my gift. I at first felt I had to be somebody other than me.
Right.
And I wanted to just be me because that's who God created me to be. And I think it took me some time because unlike a lot of pastors' wives, I didn't start out when in my 20s. And
right.
As a blessing, we both had careers. We had some savings. We had choices we could make. We had the option to make choices. And if something wasn't working, we could try something different. Mm-hmm. And our kids were grown. So I think that's a blessing because I think it'd be a lot harder when you have kids at home and the 2 of you have to work on that together in addition to.
Oh my gosh.
It's just,
we planted a church 3 months after our 5th child was born.
Oh my goodness.
My wife still doesn't say that she ever gave her permission to do that. She's, but like when you hear that stuff from the Lord.
Uh-huh. You got to know it's going to work out, but you have to make sure it's from the Lord.
Yeah, and you're really not arguing about it.
No. We never argued about Idaho. That was the biggest.
Yeah.
So then the reason we were there, COVID hit, and as you know, as a pastor during COVID, I think that was a really stressful period of time.
Yeah, it was.
Both you have to learn to do church online really fast and what all that entails and deal with the political side of a pandemic, the emotional side of a pandemic. So anyways, we started our own church. It was an online church. And we were having people from Minnesota and Texas, Utah. He was going and preaching at small churches in Utah. And we did that for about a year and a half until his parents moved in with us. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was a couple of years, something. His parents moved in with us for 7 months. At the time, they were like 96, 97, and 94. And they didn't like living during COVID in an assisted living, which they just moved in right when COVID hit.
Right.
And so they moved in with his older brother. That didn't work out. So they moved in with us because I encouraged them to, because they were going to go back to Duluth, but they would have had to be separated.
Yeah.
And I thought, after 70-some years, there's no way I'm going to let you be separated. So they moved in with us until they could get into a place in Duluth for both of them with memory care.
Right.
Because my mother-in-law had dementia. Yeah. Father-in-law, totally cool dude. She is too, but not quite as with it as he was. So they left in December, the end of December, beginning of January. Don't even ask me which year now. We've been here a year, so it was a year before that, I think. And then we get lots of those letters or cards, about people trying to hire pastors. And we're like, yeah, we've been there, done that. I don't think so. So he'd look at him, he'd pray for him, and then throw him away. And then every now and then you get one, and you're like, oh, this is really cool. Yeah, but I don't want to move to Indiana. But so we got this one, and
there was none from San Diego.
I did see an opening in San Diego. We could never afford to live there, and we'd have to commute from somewhere because it was in a very expensive part of San Diego. And we're like, yeah, no, I don't feel there was no call. But this church here, in coming to your question, here we got. They didn't talk about their building. So many churches, when they send out things, we've been a church for 5 billion years, and we built, and it's all about, and then a little blurb about their church people.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I'm not even going to go there. And if they don't have half of them don't have websites, and I'm like, I don't think so.
I don't want to be a janitor.
Yeah, exactly. So at Emmanuel, we got this. Patrick looked at it, showed it to me. I said, sounds interesting. So he pursued it. And he had numerous phone interviews, Zoom interviews. And what I was really impressed with, because we had an interview at a different church up in northern Idaho, and the way they handled it impressed me.
Yeah.
You could tell God was in the process. He didn't get that up there. And that was fine, because God, you could just see the people were truly seeking God. Yeah. And it felt very similar here. And in fact, when they offered it to him, we're both going, why would they offer it to us? It's like, why? We don't have the experience of half these pastors that were probably applying. But God just was in it. Yeah. So we came out to visit. My daughter lives in Portland, so it helped that our daughter would be only an hour away. Our son's still in the Bay Area. And my daughter came up for a deposition to Longview, and she called me and she goes, you're going to hate it. There's nothing there, Kathy. You're going to hate it.
Oh, no.
So we'd come from, the Bay Area with lots of foodie restaurants and shops, and I love to shop. I don't like to buy, but I love to shop. And so she said, I don't think you're going to like it. So I came prepared not to like it when we came for an actual interview in person. And Patrick said, if you hate it, we won't go. Yeah. I love the people. Huh. I thought the downtown wasn't hideous. There was a couple cute shops. I don't know why, but God's just like, okay, feels right. It felt right. The people were incredible. And I will say, I've said that to them. I've said, you know what? When I lived in Idaho, I was wondering if Patrick died while we were still there, where would I want to move? Because I don't think I'd want to stay there. Yeah. And I told some friends recently, I said, Patrick and I were talking about that. And I said, I might still move closer to Sarah in Portland, but I might just stay here. Yeah. The people are incredible. And I mean that with all sincerity. So you're right. This is a really cool church. The people are incredible.
So let's talk about people for a minute.
Okay.
Because the church is made up of people.
Yes, good and bad.
Yeah. And people tend to have expectations. Uh-huh. And they have expectations that are not necessarily even connected to you, mm-hmm. but more to the church or to the pastor. Mm-hmm. And I have so many questions. Sure. I have so many questions. How do you navigate people's expectations when those expectations don't really add up to who you are?
I think that was a real issue for me early on.
Yeah.
Early on, meaning just a few years ago, not 20. Now I think I'm secure in who I am enough that I'm like, this is who I am. And no, I'm probably not going to do children's ministry. No, I definitely probably won't do youth ministry. I don't think that's where my gifts are.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing, one of the lessons I feel we've learned is to build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make a lot of changes until you've built some relationships, till you get to know the lay of the land of people, what their expectations are to a degree. I just want to be real. And I know that at some churches that probably wouldn't work.
Well, sometimes I think you have to almost contend for being yourself.
Yes.
And not that you're feisty with people, but like, it's not even about self-esteem as much as just being authentic.
Yes.
And it really feels good to be authentic. It really
does.
feels good
And
when you can go to bed at night and think, I didn't have to try to be somebody else today.
No, and it took me the first couple of years, I didn't understand. I felt like I was in a haze because people would introduce you as, oh, this is pastor's wife. I said,
Yeah.
AKA Kathy.
Yeah.
You know, I have another name. And so anytime somebody calls me pastor's wife, they can do it as long as they add my name to it, okay? They're introducing me to somebody.
Yeah.
But I just want to love people where they're at. And I can have a strong personality. But then again, I don't think it's that bad. But how do you handle that? Just be yourself.
Yeah.
And if they don't like you, there's not much you could do about it.
And I think some of it's just the way you're wired. I remember the first time I met you, I was coming over there to do something, and I met you at a church service.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I told Patrick afterwards when we were talking is I really enjoyed meeting Kathy today because it felt like there was nothing I had to fight through to get to her. Mm. You were just really open, and I don't know, there was just this ease about things. And I am sure the people at Emmanuel will love that about you. That
I hope so.
They can walk up and talk to you. They can find out who you are, and you'll give them a sincere answer. You're not trying to pretend anything.
No.
So I think that's a great model for people in a church. I mean, so many times the last person you can go to model Christianity with is the pastor's wife, because they're just so wrapped up in stuff and so bound up in stuff. And I think it's just a gift for a pastor's wife to be accessible.
And so I think it's a gift that I didn't start this until I was more secure
probably.
in who I am. I like who I am now more than I ever did when I was 30.
Yeah.
Would I go back to being 30 if I could be who I am now? Yes. If I could have everything exactly and it just the age changed, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
But I like who God is creating me to be, and I still have lots of lessons to learn. And I think the most important thing is just to let people know they're loved.
Yeah.
To try not getting involved in not confidential, but political things. Mm-hmm. Because you know what? Yes, we live in this kingdom, but our kingdom is that kingdom.
Yeah.
And that's where we need
to
stay focused.
Yeah, that's very real.
And, and not condemn each other for not believing exactly the same. I just think that's wrong.
Yeah.
And we all have opinions. I worked as an elder with this older gentleman, and I said, he'd been a missionary. He'd owned businesses. And I said, you don't talk up much. What's with that? He goes, well, I have lots of opinions, but I've learned as I get older, I don't always have to voice all of them. And I'm like, really? So I'm still learning that one, okay? Because I can have lots of opinions, and I'm trying to learn I don't need to voice all of them. But I think my biggest struggle is to not try to jump in and fix everything. Mm-hmm. They need this, they need that. So when we first started at this church, their admin left. And it was a blessing. I mean, I was able to fill in that role, and I got to know people better than I ever would have if I hadn't been in that office. And so that's a blessing. I just have to watch my boundaries and my time. And I find that Patrick and I can spend too much time talking about church and not enough about like everything else.
Yeah.
And it's still a struggle, as I'm sure you know, where you're trying to brainstorm ideas
or just have a conversation that isn't about work.
And exactly. But I also feel the pastor at our last church who took over when Patrick left, the one they finally hired. We went out several times, but his wife said something really interesting because I was trying to understand what does it mean to be a pastor's wife, all that still. And she said, she sees her biggest role is just being there to listen and encourage her husband. Because you can get beat up like crazy. And sometimes you just need somebody who'll be real with you. Sometimes you need somebody who's just going to say, yay, rah, rah, you can do this. Or pray for him.
Yeah. In a church setting, one of the things I've found is there's a lot of people who need the pastor and are unabashed about how much they need you. Did it ever concern you that there were all these people who needed Patrick, and you still needed him too? I mean, did you ever feel like you were fighting for his attention? Because it seems like that would be
I think it would if we'd been a lot younger. If we'd been a lot younger, if we'd had children together at that time when we were going through the same thing, I think that would be more of a challenge.
Yeah.
I think we're blessed because we're both independent people.
Yeah, you are.
And we're there for each other. I look at us as being a limited liability partnership, and we do everything we can to make it better,
Yeah.
And he's got gifts I don't have, a lot of them. And I maybe have some discernment he doesn't have, just from a female perspective.
That's handy.
And no, I haven't felt that. I think sometimes I want to make sure it doesn't overwhelm him.
Yeah.
So I'll want to go let's go to the beach.
Distract him.
Yeah, let's go to the beach. Let's, whatever. But no, we're here and now we're in a really good place.
It does make a difference age. It really does. And where you're at in life. When you have kids at home and you're younger, I remember Jody saying to me, how am I supposed to compete with your girlfriend?
Yeah, the church.
Yeah, the church. It's like, I can't do it, let alone the fact that you talk to God all the time and he talks back to you. And how am I supposed to compete with God who talks to you?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I think a lot of that, is part of the early years that you kind of grow, you figure out a way through it.
Yeah. I think it would be really hard because you need that. If the pastor is the husband, you really need his input with the children. I think you need a lot more of that. And I'm not insecure about our relationship. And I feel like it works. I mean, we're best friends.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't occasionally both want to kill each other. We've told the kids, don't worry, we'll never divorce. We may kill each other, but now I've said I won't kill you. I might torture you a little bit, but we're really good friends, and you've got humor.
See, that's what I mean by you're a blessing to this church. You're a gift to this church because you're at a place right now where you have a lot of this stuff out of the way and you can just be yourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that congregation adores the fact that they can just have you the way you are and not be on some journey to try to fix the world or fix the church or change everything around. There's always some things that you want to change, but it's comforting to know that the pastor and his wife are okay with who they are.
Oh, we love who they are. Doesn't mean there's not things we'd change or improve or modernize or, I think that's always going to be in our DNA.
Yeah.
And we're trying to kind of go, if it's not broken, why are we trying to fix it?
Yeah.
And I see God's hand working at blessing it, and we have to just make sure that Satan looks for every opportunity. He's not incredibly smart. He does the same things over and over, but he just seems to do them really well.
And they just really work.
Yeah. I mean, little lies or doubts or, I think he wants to stay focused on the spiritual. And so often he gets sucked into, where's that chair go? I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
And I think Satan uses that. because I think where he needs to be is focused on helping lead, as he put it, Lutherans in a closer relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And not just Lutheran. We welcome anybody, just like I'm sure you would. And one of the things we'd love to have the time to do is go visit other churches.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
So much of what we talked about is really needs to be talked about. And I hope that because of this interview, Kathy, honestly, that some other pastors' wives in town would get on the phone and give you a call, reach out to you and say, can we just have coffee and talk? I just need somebody to talk to.
This is really interesting that you say that. I had told you I'd got up and spoken a bit about abuse in my family, and I had women come out of that. I'm not shocked at all. Come out and say this happened to me. And I think when things are in the dark, they grow.
Yeah.
But there's a group for pastors, but there's no group for pastors' wives.
Right.
And I think I'd have more of a heart for something like that, personally, because I am who I am, and God put me where I am, and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to be who you are. It's okay. I'm not perfect. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to have problems, to struggle. It's okay.
Yeah.
You'll get through them. You just got to trust in him.
Yeah.
But you need people.
You do need people.
And I think, Pastor, you said something really good. I would love to start something with pastors' wives.
Yeah.
And I don't really care what denomination, because that's not important to me.
Yeah.
It's about the kingdom of God.
So if you're a pastor watching this, give this to your wives and tell them to watch this and get all the Kathy.
No, but let's get together.
There's a lot that we could do in the city relationally that isn't being done because we're so siloed in our own congregation. So I just thank you so much for taking the time to do this, because I think it's an open door for a relationship that doesn't really exist right now. And I hope that it does because of who you are. And
let's just be praying that God opens up whatever doors need to be opened up.
Yeah.
Because I know there's women out there that need it.
Yeah.
Maybe some men too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Husbands.
Thank you.
Thank you.